Satan, interviewing. You know that's what they doing. Stick around. It's about to get all roomy up in here. Remote Ruby starts now.
What is up, Andrew?
Today, I have a cursed idea.
Oh boy, this is a great way to start. Let's just dive in.
Well, all right. So, are you familiar with gems like Paper Trail and Audited?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I should probably explain what they are. And I realized in the midst of me saying that, I'm like, wait, if he says no.
Well, if somebody listening doesn't know.
Yes. They are ways to track changes to your Rails models for auditing and versioning. One big use case you could think of for this would be to build an audit log of user actions, or maybe if you run like a newsletter site that different collaborators maybe work in the same newsletter, you want to see what user made what action on a certain record. Paper Trail and Audited are gems to do that. They are ways to track changes to your models. I think both of them, those ones specifically, they rely on active record callbacks basically. So whenever a record has been updated or touched basically with a new version, that's the things that you can watch for to trigger events on. So any sort of action on the record itself, like created, I don't think new because that doesn't trigger an active record, but any of those type
I mean, you could before create.
Yes.
So,
yep. Things like that. Create, update, destroy, things like that.
yeah.
So we were looking into something interesting this week, and we do a lot of things at Podia that have bulk updates. So update all, destroy all. Rails actually does a delete all under the hood on some things we learned this week. When you're setting like associated model, if you're doing a join table stuff, Rails will do a delete all under the hood for you in certain circumstances. And what we wanted to do was to have some of these actions be in this audit log thing we were looking at, but none of those types of update all, destroy all, insert all, none of them trigger an active record. I keep saying callback. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm going to keep using it because I feel like that makes sense in the context.
Yeah.
It doesn't trigger an active record callback in the same way that doing an update on a record would. There's multiple avenues we could go down on ways to solve this, but none of them involve the actual gems use case. They don't allow you to do this. They specifically like, yeah, that's not a feature we support because of XYZ reasons, because of how this gem works and relying on active record, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I am curious to get your...
This is interesting. Just thinking about the complexity of if you're in a Hatchbox and you delete a cluster, that means you delete the apps on the cluster, the environment variables for the apps, the databases, the database clusters for it. What do you put in the log for that? It's a complicated thing because I actually don't know that I want to spam my user with 3,500 little actions that resulted because some parent thing was deleted and all the child things ended up deleted in the same step because of that or whatever. So
right,
you just got me thinking about that. What does that even look like in the notifications and stuff for it? Well, maybe you want to record all those individual changes, but then they need to be like grouped together somehow in a bigger action or something. It does get complicated, which you think you can grab those gems and just poof, off the shelf, grab the gem, slap it in, we're done. Reality never works that easily.
Not quite. Now, before I get to my very cursed idea, here's another part of this that has been in my brain. The point of doing update all on a bunch of records or destroy all on a bunch of records in my brain is so that you don't load every single one of those records into memory and then iterate through them, right? But if you're thinking of like, oh, well, we want to create an entry in our audit log for each time this happens. If we want to do that in a non-cursed way, we have to get all those records and then iterate through them. And that's the whole point of doing it in a bulk anyway. We would be taking like a massive, in my opinion, performance hit by doing
You'd
something
have
like
to
that.
do it in a background job or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's my idea. Okay.
I'm ready.
I need you to
I put my seatbelt on. I am ready to go.
We override update all.
Okay.
All right. So
Ooh.
I know, right? I just want to say for anyone listening to this, I'm not going to do this, right? I'm not going to do this. But
it's cursed for a reason.
It's a cursed idea. But when you start to think about it, because I said this to Jason and he started laughing. He's like, dude, I'm done with you. And then he kind of sat back for a second. Wait, you have a good point, but we're still not going to do that. I agree. We should not do this. But if you think about it, I want to apply these types of actions on these update all, insert all. I don't say we have to do it globally. We could just do it on the models we do this on. But if you think about it, if you wanted to create an audit entry for every time a record has to go through update all or some sort of bulk deletion or bulk action, I'm not saying it's the best way, but I'm saying it is a way to update or just override update all and wire it straight into there. Call super.
Yeah. As long as you did that in a seamless way that didn't affect that, then that could be all right. An example of this that is tricky, a couple examples is paranoia, which is a similar concept of when we call destroy, let's actually just not delete the record, but let's set a deleted attribute. That causes complexity because you've got to filter those records out on every query, and they try to do that automatically for you, but they've also hooked into the internals of active record a little too much, so it makes it really hard to maintain and continue on that. But something like prefixed IDs or hash IDs or any of those gems that introduce friendly ID as well. Let's introduce a different parameter for the records, or overriding find is actually not that bad to do because you kind of always want that. It does get a little tricky when you like go through an association and call find versus find directly on the model. So there's actually a few places you have to hook into and override. But it would be interesting to do something like that as long as it's simple like that and doesn't do too much hooking into the internals. Not terrible. But on the other hand, discard is way better than paranoia because it adds a discard method and just call that instead. The trouble with this problem is you want developers not to have to know we have to call discard instead of destroy. That's a good thing to explicitly call soft delete in your application code for destroy and discard. But in your case, you just want to track these changes regardless of what triggers it and how it happens and all that stuff. Right. So it makes it a nice place to hook in to do something like that.
Probably the best solution is just to use the database itself to track these changes, right? Then you skip all of Rails.
Yeah.
But if
we can get Derek Sivers back on.
If you're doing this,
he could do that.
Trying to think of a Rails solution, the problem that I had was basically what you just described. There'll have to be a change to the way they're used to calling destroy. Okay, we'll have to use this discard method. Now, in order to get these audit logs for these bulk updates without doing something crazy, like I said, you'd have to call something manually every time that you did one of these bulk changes. Every developer coming after that would have to know, oh, well, these audit logs have to be created whenever we do these insert alls or these update alls, yada, yada, yada. And it just creates a bunch of overhead and then things are going to get missed.
Yeah. Here's another idea for you. What if you build a wrapper, like a facade presenter around the stuff that's a with audit logs that you put your object in? It knows how to do an update all, but it is going to do the watching for the changes from the external side and then just let the update all happen, but it can then check afterwards and say like, this is what they did and intercept that without having to override anything. You could achieve hopefully the same thing with simple delegator or whatever as just kind of a wrapper that says, hey, let's extend this operation and do it that way.
That kind of reminds me of some Sandy Metz type ideas. I had never thought about that. That's probably a good idea.
Yeah, it's a cool way to do it because if you know that you're like, it's sort of the same problem, it's not seamless. Right. But if you have a with audit logs and you can throw these operations in there on whatever object you give it, then it does at least document the process of what needs to happen a lot better without doing the hacky overrides and things like that that can be hard to maintain in the long run. It's also probably pretty easily testable and stuff too, which is cool.
Right.
But I found that to be like pretty great in certain situations like this that can benefit from that. So that's something to consider. It might work out pretty well there. It's one of those things where it's coming from the outside, so it has to be able to analyze what happened on the object itself to like pull out the audit changes.
Right.
So that maybe isn't as easy. It's sometimes easier to be inside of the object when you're doing that stuff. So yeah, I was just thinking you get the like previous changes with the update. Great. I guess destroy doesn't really have that, but that object keeping track of the changes, I don't know if that happens on an update all for those things. Probably not.
Probably not, because update all, it skips validations, I think, too. So,
but I guess you are receiving the hash of changes you're applying to those. So
right.
That's the same data that you would get from previous changes. So I guess it doesn't matter in this case.
Right.
So that's kind of handy, actually.
This was just top of mind where I was, what did I have to think about this week? I did think about this. I just want someone else to tell me that this update all thing is wrong.
And having done that in the past, it's kind of a pain. The nice part about that is nobody has to jump through a hoop in order to accomplish that, which is great to an extent, but it's got its things. However, that is a good example of you could wrap it in an object that can do the recording, but if you were going to override the update all method, if you treat it the exact same way, where you say, hey, give me your arguments, I'm going to record these in an audit log, I'm going to just call super and pass in the same arguments to the original method.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
basically extending the method with no changes. So it's going to be like perfectly compatible forever. You've just added your own extra step afterwards as your own little callback. So in a way, it's kind of the same thing, but an okay way of overriding. I don't mind doing that kind of stuff because it's very unlikely to break.
100% would be using super.
Yeah, it's fun stuff. Somebody can say, hey, we need audit logs for these things. And what the hell does that even mean? That is such a like can of worms the second you start looking into it. Because just thinking about it for Hatchbox, I want to do a thorough thing for that. But like somebody renames the cluster, not a big deal. Somebody deletes the cluster or deletes an app. Okay, well, that's a lot more complicated to keep in track. Maybe if you delete, only the parent object needs to be in the history. But you have to think about so many of those things, because if you attach memcache to an application, that creates 3 environment variables. So do we have 3 logs that memcached was added, or is it one that just happens to combine the 3 into its own thing? I don't know. And then do you do the tracking at the application level there, the database, or the environment variables? It's kind of like the join table in between. Sometimes those are intended to be invisible.
I've worked on a very much more extensive audit log project in the past, and it was at the level where, let's say that you're on my team, I might not want you to see certain names on the team. Yeah. Depending on the level of the user's role, which was a whole other thing. Depending on the user's role, they may or may not see the user's name, or they may see, a generic placeholder, internal person, for example, something like that. So it can get really complicated. And it's something that one of my coworkers said this week that really kind of stuck with me was having an incomplete audit log is worse than having no audit log at all. Stuck with me, and I really agree with, because when I was working at this previous company and had to do this big auditing project, I didn't do it from scratch, but I added things to it over the years. If it's wrong, this is what people are using to like check things. So you don't realize how much into the process people start to integrate these types of features, where all of a sudden support is, we don't see this in the audit log, and the customer doesn't see this in the log, and we see this on our end because we can see all these events and they can only see a subset of these events and blah, 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 and they don't match. And then you have to go in and fix the audit log. And I can't think of a good justification of time. That's such a poor use of time, in my opinion. Is like, now we have to go maintain this other thing that shouldn't have to have anything, but stuff happens. The app goes down, there's errors, yada, yada, things don't get added. And then you're like, well, now how do we fix that?
You just reminded me of a tiny example of this, but the first time I was doing payments code, oh, we'll just render out in the invoices and whatever, like your current payment method on file, because that's what it should be, right? And then someone changes it and you're like, actually, we need to save, even though it's going to be duplicate data, we need to save the card specifically for every invoice, every receipt, just so that in the audit logs, if someone's name changed and they're impersonating somebody else or whatever it is, you want to know that data at the time of when it happened. Maybe you also need to be able to see the current value of it as well. But there are so many of those nuances of like, you have to keep track of the data at the time, what it was, what it became, what it is now. All three of those are different states that you may need to know at any given time, and being able to look through that is critical. So you can't just ever rely on the current value of things. It's the same thing as building a bank ledger or something. The balance at the time was important to know. The current balance is not usually relevant unless you're just looking for that currently. And there's so many different ways of looking at data and keeping track of what's changed and how it's changed, why it changed, all of that. It gets really complex real fast.
I completely forgot about the impersonating user aspect. I've had to work on that multiple times. If I'm impersonating this user and I execute this action, do we want it to show that a support person executed this action? Or do we want it to say that the user executed this action, because the user might come back and be like, what the F? I didn't do that. But you executed on their behalf. So
yeah, it's crazy. If the system did something, there's a cron job that runs every hour or something, you might just assign it to the account owner or something, because you put the null is false or whatever on the association for the actor. And it's, well, no, actually that needs to be something. You might have to create a system user or something, a cron user, whatever, so that it can be attributed to the right thing. Because half the problem that you run into with a lot of that stuff when you're looking at it, it's, yes, this happened at that time, but why? What triggered it? And if you don't have that information, then you also are out of luck a lot of times trying to figure out, what did this? Why did it do that right at that moment? Or why did it do it that way? So it's wild how much knowledge you have to try to bake into audit logs and other things like that. And you can really easily miss some of that. So,
yeah. And a lot of times what I find is that the initial idea is really simple, right? We want to know, on a blog post, we want to track changes to like user updated this value, user changed this value. And then it turns into, well, we don't want it to read like that. We want it to read like this for the user. We want certain permissions to be able to see this, but not others. And then, then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's such a complex feature, and it doesn't sound like it.
Yeah. And it's funny because that was the biggest joke about editing your tweets, was never a thing for so long. But the second that that became a thing, you can write one thing, get someone to reply angrily about whatever you said, then you go back and edit your post to be the exact opposite. And then they just look like a butthole for their response. And that was never actually what they replied to. And so I've seen that with some hilarious trolling and stuff, Facebook and Twitter or whatever. But that's the complexity that you get into, even adding something as simple as editing. It's insane to think about. And you have to build a system that has a way of denoting that. It's simple enough to just show that this was edited. So looking at the timestamps and the history and keeping track of each of the edits so you can reread the original and the second edit and the third edit and so on is important, because that is what keeps that history of what actually happened, what the people are actually replying to and whatever. But it's kind of insane. If I remember right, I don't know if you're familiar with the bucket stuff that they do in Basecamp. As far as I understood, every time you edit, it basically just creates a brand new record. And so they just kind of point to the latest version of the record, and they don't have to keep track of the individual edits. They just have a whole new record that they can point to, and they have full history of everything. And you know what? Your database is pretty good at compression. So not that big of a deal if you're storing some duplicate text or whatever it is. And I thought that was a pretty interesting way of doing it because it's full history. Don't have to get into the weeds too much for some of that. And they're like a private systems they can get by with simpler stuff than if you're dealing with Twitter or Facebook or anything that's public. And at that scale, the discussions that are being had about these topics are like very heated. You cannot afford to like allow people to abuse the system on that level. You're not likely to go be abusing that on your private team that you're paying for on Basecamp, but it is important. And I thought that was a cool solution that they came up with that was, yeah, let's just make a new record every time. Why do we even need to do anything else, anything super fancy? This works really well. And I was like, that does work really well. And that's really elegant the way that that works. I think it was in one of the On Writing Software Well videos that David talked about it somewhere. If anybody has a link to that, you should send it to us and we'll put it in the notes or whatever. But that was worth watching. I thought that was a cool approach.
Yo, quick question for you. Do you want higher clarity into production but don't have the time to become a wizard in observability? Honeybadger Insights is exactly what you need. Forget the old school trio of logs, metrics, and traces. We're talking structured events that don't just sit there. They're your treasure map to solving mysteries in your app. With Honeybadger, sling your logs and events into the mix and voila, you just unlock the power of Honeybadger's new query language, BadgerQL. It's like having a conversation with your data. Ask it anything, turn mishaps into metrics, and showcase your wins on dashboards that even the marketing team will drool over. And guess what? This isn't just for big spenders. Honeybadger's got you covered with a free plan that packs a punch, including error tracking, uptime monitoring, sleek status pages, and more. Oh, and speaking of errors, Honeybadger treats them like VIPs at the club. With Insights and BadgerQL, your errors aren't just problems, they're opportunities. Explore your data in ways you didn't think were possible and get the insights that you deserve. Check out honeybadger.io. That's right, honeybadger.io.
I watched those videos a long time ago. It might be time to revisit them.
They're old now. They don't feel that old. That didn't seem like it was that long ago.
They came out when I was learning to write Rails. That was wow. I was either still an intern or it was in my first couple of weeks in my big boy job.
I remember watching those and being like, wow, this is really interesting. And I hope David gets some time to do some more of those in the future or someone at Basecamp. It's really just eye-opening to see like there's other ways to think about solving problems because the ways that get talked about all the time are super common and you can pretty much think of them, those patterns or whatever. But something like that, auditing tools, they all kind of do the same approach, a little bit differently here and there, whatever, but generally same thing. And then seeing that, I was, oh, this is really interesting. It's a very different way of solving that same problem. I can't get enough of those things that explain, here's how to do that same thing you've done, but totally different. That eye-opening stuff blows my mind. I love it.
Yeah, I like getting a new perspective on problems because we all have inherent biases, inherent beliefs, things that have shaped us as we've grown up, things that we've experienced, all of those. To bring that to the table is why I really like relish in hearing other people's experience. That's part of the reason why I came on this podcast. Hey, I have a bad idea. I'm sure Chris has either experienced this problem or maybe he's got some horror story for me, but that perspective is what allows you to make a more informed decision wherever you decide to get that perspective.
Yeah, and that's why I like reading source code for Rails and gems and whatever I can, because it's the same thing, just ideas on new ways to think about problems and stuff. Have you ever watched Destroy All Software from Gary Bernhardt?
I've seen some of it.
Some of those were amazing, like him building a text editor in 30 minutes. That doesn't seem that easy. And then he just goes and does it. None of this was hard. All of this fit together. They're all kind of like the basic building blocks I already knew. I just didn't know how to put them together the way he did. And he did it in 30 minutes, and now it feels very simple. It's wild when you see it, some of those and you're like, I know all these tools. I have them all in my hands, but I never put them together that same way. It's such a cool feeling.
I know, just to pivot topics here, I think we've kind of pushed this one. I was not at RailsConf And I know y'all talked about it last week on an episode that I wasn't here for because I was in the Grand Canyon at the time, wishing I had made different decisions that brought me there. But I'm just kind of curious to get your perspective on RailsConf this year. Quick rundown on what you thought they did well or not well, and then what you think about it kind of ending.
It was awesome, man. You missed out the best RailsConf that I can remember, really. There were ones that were bigger that I've been to, but this one felt just so great. Partly, I'm sure that's different because my perspective now is I was just a stranger attending in 2016 or whatever. And then now it's like I'm a mini celebrity at the conferences. So it feels very different, but they had a great venue. Everything was laid out well. The talks that were picked were all ones that I wanted to go see. The atmosphere, everybody was really having a great time. There was just such a good vibe there and it was fantastic. So I have no complaints about it. The whole committee and everybody working on RailsConf this year just knocked it out of the park. And surprisingly, the opening of the conference being, hey, unfortunately, next year is the last one, didn't put a downer on the conference at all. It actually was a good thing to talk about during that. And there's people getting excited about next year's is going to be awesome. It'll be the last one. Celebration of everything of RailsConf for all these years. Everything comes to an end at some point. And it was just kind of optimistic feeling instead. A little sad undertone, but of course, that's the last RailsConf. So it's over. That being said, I think a lot of people are just going to go to RubyConf instead. RubyConf is CFP just opened yesterday, I think it was.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be kind of a bridge or a home for everyone who normally would go to RailsConf. You'll just go to RubyConf now. And RubyConf always has conversations about Rails as well. So it's not like you are required to talk about non-Rails things at RubyConf. It is written in Ruby, so it's welcome there. So I think that'll be totally fine. And I'm hoping that it also helps Ruby Central take a break. That's a lot to organize 2 conferences a year, pretty much nonstop. So hopefully that will give them some time to relax throughout the year after they finish RailsConf. But they're always probably going to be doing a little bit of work on the next one, the next RubyConf in this case. I'm curious to hear when we'll find out where RailsConf is going to be for the final one. I don't know. Phoenix.
We hit 112 degrees Fahrenheit yesterday.
Ooh.
The record, baby.
Dang. We'll be inside. So
November, however, when is RailsConf normally? May? Yeah, May gets hot.
Yeah.
Maybe not Phoenix.
April, May, something like that.
One day
I thought it would be cool if it was in Chicago, kind of to bring it right back home. But also RubyConf is in Chicago in November. Yeah. So who knows? Drew Bragg was pushing real hard to bring it to Philly, which would be fun.
No way.
But
you think so?
I had fun there. I had cheesesteaks there. Last time I was there for Drew's wedding. So that was a blast. But we were there and went to fireworks for New Year's or something and stayed a night in the city. That was fun. Got some cheesesteaks. What all did we have? I remember this one cookie was like a blueberry muffin, but a cookie in that Reading Terminal Market. It was bomb. It was good. So I am down for wherever. Puerto Rico was one of the options. I wouldn't normally want to go to Puerto Rico or pick that if I was going to go somewhere. If I was to go pick somewhere, I would go travel to Europe or something, or Japan or whatever. So Puerto Rico is too close to home to choose, or I'd go to Cancun or something, Mexico somewhere. That'd actually be a really cool place to go. It might be hard to get people there. It might be more expensive to travel to, but it's also the last RailsConf, so maybe it's a good excuse to do that. I don't know. But
Puerto Rico would be awesome.
I think that would be really cool. Really cool.
I love that. I would wake up and surf every morning. It would be awesome. I probably wouldn't even attend the conference, honestly, but now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I would love to go there. It was great. I really liked RailsConf this year. It was definitely one of the best ones, most memorable ones for sure for me. Looking forward to RubyConf. Are you going to RubyConf in Chicago?
Probably. I'm definitely going to Rails World.
Yeah.
So I will definitely be there. I usually go to RubyConf. I really like RubyConf. And I've
Me
been
too.
going for,
Well, I really like it. I've only been there once.
I can't think if I've missed one or not. I think I missed, didn't they do one in Texas? I think I missed that one.
I have no idea.
I can't
San
remember.
Diego was the only one I went to.
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun at RubyConf. I have had friends from work over the years go with me to RubyConf who've become much closer friends. So I have a very positive mental image of RubyConf. So I love going. And I like the different style of talks too. I like the more Ruby focused ones.
Me too. I feel like that's a theme we've been hitting on with Go Rails content lately is kind of, you might be writing Rails, but it's all Ruby. And if you really want to get good at Rails, you better get good at Ruby, not Rails. The APIs and stuff that Rails gives you are excellent, but in order to use them very well, it's just Ruby. You need to be good at Ruby. Focus on that, and Rails will become easy for you, at least much more understandable. That I think is good for people to recognize and stuff. Rails does give you the tools, but the tools are built in Ruby. So if you want to be an expert in Rails, it's Ruby on Rails for a reason.
Yeah, I was one of those people that learned Ruby alongside Rails. And it came to a point, now I remember this because I was like, did I ever run into this? I did run into this. It came to a point where I can't write good Rails because I can't write good Ruby. And if I want to become a better Rails developer, I have to go back to the fundamentals a bit, which I did. And I think that was very much worth my time. Though learning Ruby in the context of learning Rails helped me in my brain because I'm very much like, I need to see the application of this. Theories and all that doesn't help me. So I'm not going to say it was a bad thing that I learned Ruby as I learned Rails, but it definitely changed what I had to do once I reached the breaking point of, okay, this is no longer a Rails problem. This is not something I can just look up in the Rails docs and come up with a solution for. Like, I need to learn better Ruby to do this.
Have you heard that term of expert beginner?
Yes.
The idea for anybody that doesn't know is you could be like me, where I spent 6 months learning Rails, not knowing any Ruby. Syntax was similar enough to Python. I thought, okay, cool, I got this. I don't need to really learn the language that much because it's not very different. So I spent all my time learning Rails and getting good at Rails, and I could go spin up a basic Rails application pretty quickly and do some features and stuff. But when it came to debugging and breaking out of sort of the examples that you saw, that's where I noticed that I got really good at doing the beginner basics, but I couldn't get past that. And that was where I like stalled out and realized I got to go back and learn Ruby itself because I don't know how to deal with nested loops and metaprogramming. I don't really know how active record works. And there are all types of things that just come out of nowhere and they're generated code. And I don't know how to debug that or even go look it up or whatever. And so I stepped back and learned Ruby, and that was a big step and really made a big difference. But that's a trap that a lot of people can fall into, is just you get really good at the basics, the beginner things. And then how do I go from there to being a Rails contributor or something? Feels like such a giant gap. And it is.
It is. For me, I guess I don't want to say for everyone. For me, it came down to having someone to teach me, because I wrote Rails at a company fresh out of college for a while, and I learned a lot, but I felt like I was at my breaking point. A bunch of people had left, and I need to become a better Rails developer. I need to become a better Rails developer. But the people who were interested in helping me become a better Rails developer have now departed. And now I feel like I'm just doing the slog of like, okay, I just know how to solve these tickets because I've been working here for a while. So I'm just doing this like in a cycle, in a loop. I think Nate Hopkins literally said, I can make you a senior developer if you want to come work with me. And whatever he promised me, he delivered on, because I didn't leave that company and join CodeFund for money. I left because I was like, this will be something that will change possibly my career in terms of the education. Because Nate was like, I want to teach you. I want to pair with you. I want to get down in the weeds. And I learned so much during that time that maybe I wasn't a quote unquote senior developer when I came out, but when I came out, I was able to get senior developer pay.
Yeah. Oh man. I love that so much. That is absolutely true, that there are so many people that are seniors that want to help the
Yeah.
juniors become seniors, and you find the person who is driven and wants to learn and will happily take you under our wing because we want to see you succeed. And it's really just us looking back at, man, it took me 10 years to learn this stuff and it should have only taken me 3, but I just didn't have the right person to learn from. And I would love to save you the time and whatever. And that's a big part of what we do. Yeah, there's so much stuff that I learned very, very slowly because I didn't have anybody. Like when I started learning to code, I was reading a book in grade school and there was no adults around or whatever to teach me to code. So I just did basic stuff for a long time, very slowly learning. And then I would say that the trajectory I ended up on by starting Go Rails and trying to teach other people stuff was what really accelerated me forward. Because then I had to like do the hard things and explain what I kind of understood, but maybe kind of didn't understand. And then really was able to realize, oh, I don't understand this. I can't teach it because I don't know what I'm talking about. And then I did a little talk at Shopify yesterday remotely, and Raphael had reminded me about, I think he watched one of my videos and then emailed me about something that I needed help with or whatever. And then we talked for a couple hours. It's been so interesting to learn from someone like Raphael on how do you even remotely do the things that you do maintaining Rails? How do you decide that this PR is bad or good or needs work or whatever? Those are super interesting experience that I've never had, but now I get to watch Raphael and go talk to him when I do. Here's an idea. What do you think? Could this fit into Rails? Getting his feedback on it and then being able to contribute more now. I'm learning from him and other Rails core team members, just watching their work and whatever. It's so much fun when you're in one of those positions on either side, because then you can just see the growth. And then that person who you're training, if you're on that side, is going to be able to help you do actual hard work very quickly and help you go focus on other things and whatever. And that's amazing to them. And you're over there just absorbing stuff like a sponge as fast as you can. So both sides of that is really fun. But the thing when we like emailed out that we were looking for summer intern for a tiny side project, the amount of people that applied that just didn't even really read the instructions or didn't put any thought into their applications was wild. Why would we ever pick you? Because we asked if you wanted to send us an optional 2-minute video. There's so many people that asked, how do I send a video? If you don't know how to upload a video to somewhere you pick and send us the link to it, then it's going to be a hard no for us, because we need you to be like creative and solving problems and showing that you're ambitious and can figure stuff out. And if you can't figure that out, it's hard. There's too many people. We got to go pick somebody who does want to do this.
Yeah. I realized this literally the other day, I think while I was hiking, because I was trying to get my mind on other things. There was a developer at the first Rails shop I worked with who worked in the office with me. His name was Nick Pezza. And it has only recently dawned on me how much of an influence he had on some things, because I realized he was one of the people who taught me how to figure out the answer. Not in a snarky way, but I'd be like, yo, how do I do blah, blah, blah? He'd be like, did you Google it? No. Well, let me know what it says. You know? And like, if it didn't work, he would help me, obviously, but he taught me to find my own answers. Yeah. And that was so beneficial.
That's so funny, because I use that as one of my filters for when people ask me for help anymore. They'll email me and be like, this video that you recorded doesn't work. And I'm like, okay, it doesn't work. That's all you gave me. So here's my challenge back to you. Usually I'll just kind of bombard them with a bunch of stuff to see, because it's the same thing. It's What have you done? What have you tried? What did you expect to happen? What actually happened? What have you searched for? What of those things have you tried? What happened in those? And just give me all the details. 99% of people never even respond to that. But the 1% who do actually put in the effort, and then they just need to absorb, how do I think about things? Because oftentimes they can find the solution themselves. That's what I told somebody just this week. So they emailed me about the referrals video I had, and something wasn't working. I haven't looked at that code in forever. I don't know. I asked him a couple of those things and then was like, I would throw a binding IRB in this line of code and poke around and see what happened. Sure enough, he emails me last night or this morning. Thanks, I fixed it. I did the binding IRB thing and recognized what was going wrong, and boom, got it done. And all you need as a junior is how to think about problems. As long as you're able to go figure out how to understand how things work and whatever, it's absorbing the thought process. Nate's thought process, super interesting to understand how he can go build things that you're impressed by. And how does he decide, should we build it this way or that way? What about this feature? Do we even need that feature? The questions he asks along the way, there are things you have to learn, and you can't ever read a blog post. You can't ever read a book and learn all those things. And the mentorship stuff really makes a big difference, or just watching other people work to get an idea of what are they thinking when they go through this. So I like it.
Very much a compounding thing too, in both aspects. You telling that person, hey, have you tried binding IRB? That solved their problem. In the future, they're going to reach for that first. Oh, well, last time, I was able to do this with binding IRB. And then they teach that to their other friends who are on their level. But from a mentorship perspective, I think that people who believe in mentorship, my friend John Epperson instilled this in me right out of the gate out of college. He really enjoyed mentorship. He mentored me at my first company. I still meet with him to this day, every week. And he taught me a lot. And then I in turn grew this love for mentorship. And through him and through Nate, I then started, I want to give this back to people. And then the people that I've helped mentor, I've seen now mentor other people. And so it may seem small, but it really can compound in the lives of people that come after.
Absolutely. And you as the mentor, you don't have to really do much. Throw them a challenge, and then when they ask for help, throw them a direction, not an answer. You throw them a direction. Maybe you throw them a couple thoughts. Here's what I would consider in this situation that you might not have. And let them go. Let them figure it out. Let them do it the hard way. Let them make mistakes. What we're doing with our son Jackson, point him in the right direction, but let him go be his own and understand, how did you open this gate? You pressed this button and you got through, but I can't get through. And then he starts to learn and he sees you and whatever. It's this exact same stuff. Let them come to the thought process themselves, but give them the direction, and that will be the biggest thing. And then the other thing that you reminded me of was the book Mastery by Robert Greene. I read that at a certain point in my life 10 times because it was just the right book for me at the right time. But it was talking about, if you need a mentor and you can't find one in person, go read books and they can be your mentors. Someone wrote a book about Feynman's book. Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. Richard Feynman's book. Amazing. But it's just him talking about things and how he thought about, as a kid, radios. And when he was working at Los Alamos, having these things where he'd be in a meeting and they're talking about blueprints and he doesn't know what the symbols on the blueprints are. And so he's like, my two options are, I can ask and look dumb, or I can guess and then say, hey, what about this valve? And if I'm wrong, they'll just correct me. And then we'll continue the conversation. I will have learned what it was. And so he ends up, well, there's no sense in me just asking. I might as well just point and look dumb and whatever. And so he does that. And then the engineers, I guess, stop and just freeze. Oh my God, you're right. That valve is a problem. And so he was talking about that as like, I don't just ask questions. I will try to do my best guess, and I'm not afraid of looking dumb. And then everybody thinks he's a genius, but he's like, I'm not a genius. I just took this different approach. And then people think I'm a genius because I just didn't ask, what is this? Is this a valve? I just guessed. That was it. And it's so interesting to read those books from people like that. And wow, to him, he's just average like the rest of us, happened to take a different thought process in life and applied it to everything. And you could do the same thing, but nobody suggested that that was the thing you could do. You might not know, and you might not ever do it. There's some books like that that just change the way you think about things. Same with having a good mentor who just says, hey, why don't you throw a binding RB in there and play around? What? Okay.
Yep. Why don't you Google that first?
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. And it can be literally that simple.
Yeah.
One tiny little tip. Let's go, man. I think we should wrap it up. I am exhausted from this week, and the weather is nice, and I want to touch grass.
Go do it, dude. I think I might go on a hike this weekend.
That's nice. We have rain all day Saturday, Sunday. So if I don't touch grass now, it's going to be mud.
Go enjoy your weekend, my friend. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yep. Samesies. We'll see you next week.
Bye.